Good evening and welcome to Fire Safe Marin's webinar series. My name is Rich Shortall. I'm the Fire Safe Marin Executive Coordinator. This project is funded by the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. It's designed to help you understand and prepare for the threat of wildfire here in Marin. If we all do our part, we can minimize the risks and save lives and property. We encourage all of you to participate in tonight's discussion by providing questions in writing by using the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. Just type in your question there. Those questions, some questions we'll answer right away in writing, and some questions we will pass on to the participants in the evening here tonight. We ask, though, that you do please keep your questions related to the topic that we're covering. This recording will be available on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it or tell your friends about it later on. And we want to begin tonight by talking about our presenters. The first one is Jack Cohen, who's a Forest Service scientist, and he's going to be speaking to you about what we're calling the home ignition problem. He'll be followed by Steve Quarles, who's a retired scientist from the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety. And he's going to talk about the science that went into the research of what we call the non-combustible zone, or the first 5 feet around the home. And then finally, we'll have Todd Lando, Battalion Chief from Central Marin Fire Department, who's going to give you some practical steps on how to make improvements to that non-combustible zone right next to your home. That being said, at the end of all of this, we'll have a 15-minute roundtable where we can also take some additional questions from the audience. I'd like now to introduce Jack Cohen.
Thank you very much, Rich. So the title of this presentation is Community Fire Destruction During Extreme Wildfires, a Home Ignition Problem. Well, so perhaps you say a home ignition problem. Well, duh, we wouldn't be having this if the homes didn't ignite. But what if we could prevent homes from igniting and our communities from burning to destruction? So for right now, with our mind's eye, let's visualize our perception of how extreme wildfires ignite homes in communities. So wildfires are inevitable, and thus extreme wildfires are inevitable. And so does this mean that wildland urban fire disasters are inevitable? And my answer to that is no. But you might be surprised based on your perception of how homes ignite during extreme wildfires. So what is the general perception of how homes ignite? Well, here are 3 interview perceptions of home destruction during wildfires. The firestorm descended like a dragon from hell on the foothill neighborhoods and laid them to waste. The wildfire swept through the community with a tsunami of flame. The wildfire literally exploded houses in flames, leaving in its path. It was like a war zone. But when we look at the evidence of the disasters, when we go and examine the evidence of the disasters, the typical pattern of destruction is total home destruction with unconsumed vegetation. So what this scene indicates is that no walls of flame sweeping through communities occur, and wildfires don't literally or figuratively explode houses in flames. So when we see a scene like this, the first thing we should be seeing is the incongruity with our perception. Look at all the green vegetation next to the totally destroyed houses. And in fact, in this particular case, the wildfire had passed by this community, Los Alamos, several hours before the surface fire, the low intensity surface fire, actually spread to make contact with the homes, igniting them, burning to total destruction. So this is what we see quite typically. The ignition lofted burning embers from the extreme wildfire behavior and low intensity surface fire spreading to contact the structure, either ignited burning embers or by directly igniting from the lofted burning embers. So here is a scene from Southern California where the flammable wood roof is very vulnerable to burning embers. And we see most of the roof involved in fire, but you can also see some of the spot ignitions that have occurred on the wood covering of the roof. But also notice that the eucalyptus surrounding the house or in the background is not burning, and the surface fires are what's burning due to the lofted burning embers. And this is what this looked like after the destruction. Total home destruction surrounded by, green eucalyptus canopy. So the unconsumed tree canopies amid destruction indicates that wildfire flames did not spread through the community and burning trees did not ignite the homes. So here's paradise. And so the question, well, can you explain the unusual pattern of destruction? And the answer to the question is, well, this is the typical pattern of destruction. And no different last summer in 2020 with regard to the fires in California and Oregon. So when we look at this total destruction, and it occurred during fire, do we just look at the total destruction and ignore the rest of the surrounding green vegetation? So wildfire spreads as a sequence of ignitions, not as a sweeping mass of flame, even in this kind of behavior that we call crown fires in shrubs and trees. So it's important to recognize that ignition and fire spread is a process, and it requires a sufficiency of fuel, heat, and oxygen for that to satisfy that process for fire to occur. So when we see fire advancing extreme fire behavior, what we're looking at, and we can be quite assured that what we're looking at are the requirements for combustion being met as that fire is advancing. Well, so when we see a scene like this, the high intensity crown fire burning from right to left stops at the first residential street of this neighborhood, just from 40 feet of gap between the canopies at this street. So even without the crown fire, total home destruction occurs on the left side, initiated by burning embers from that extreme fire behavior. So typically extreme wildfires don't spread into communities. Embers are the principal initiating ignition mechanism within the community. So when we see the big flames and pay attention to the big flames, it's really the firebrands, the burning embers that are lofted out of the extreme wildfire that typically does not spread into the neighborhood or the community, that is initiating the fires within the community, and then the community spreads the fire to continue the destruction in the community. So what do unconsumed vegetation and homes adjacent to total destruction indicate? While not spread through the community like a lava flow, flash flood, or tsunami that explodes houses in flame, leaving total destruction in its wake. And very importantly, this kind of total destruction surrounded by green does not indicate high-intensity wildfire exposure. Destruction is from homes igniting and freely burning to total destruction because there were not available firefighters for protection. So importantly, the intense simultaneous heating across wide areas of structures does not occur. It's the locations that determine home ignitions. And in this particular scene, the red rectangle around this house is the extent of what was burning. So the local conditions include the vulnerabilities of a home in relation to burning objects within 100 feet of a home, and that area, the home ignition zone, or the HIZ. So let's take a look at an example of a home ignition zone. The crown fire burning from lower right to upper left with the home, which was highly ember resistant and sufficient flame heating to ignite the house. Notice that indeed it has a non-ignitable metal roof. The rest of the house is wood. It's not an ammo bunker. So in this particular case, the local conditions were not sufficient for ignition, even though a high intensity wildfire spread past the house. And in this particular case, the local conditions were sufficient without any high intensity surrounding or spreading to the location. Extreme wildfire, fire suppression, fire control is not an option. So where we have a choice, if we define wildland urban fire as a home ignition problem, we can focus on making our homes ignition resistant during extreme wildfires and prevent ignitions. So in this particular case, this home was totally destroyed without the big flames of fire even spreading to the edge of the community, as we can see from the green canopies between the totally destroyed home and where the wildfire is behind. So interestingly, in this particular fire, most of the community destruction, burning embers initiating many fires simultaneously that spread to homes from an area within 5 feet of the house. And this is an example of one of the homes that didn't burn down, where with the area right next to the home has pine needle mulch in the southeast, where they use pine needles frequently for mulching around the house. Well, so preventing ignition and burning within this 5-foot zone next to building materials is a very critical element. But note in this photo, in this scene, that it was the pine needles that burned, not the shrubbery that was over the pine needles, because it's there unconsumed, scorched but unconsumed. And we see a similar scene of where this house ignited and was successfully protected with the same kind of non-combusted, non-consumed shrubs with the pine needles carrying the fire and igniting from lofted burning embers. So we need to create a non-ignition zone within 5 feet of a home and its flammable attachments to prevent this kind of damage and potential total destruction. So in this case, the pine needles ignited from lofted burning embers, and where you see at the base that the house ignited, that was a push out. And so there were burning pine under the push out which ignited, went to the eave and into the attic. This photo is compliments of successful protection. So thank you, and we will transition to experiment foot zone.
Great. So thank you very much, Jack. Appreciate that. And again, I encourage all of our attendees to submit questions to Jack through the Q&A function. Just following up, we've all experienced house fires in our communities, even ones where we've seen that the building is fully involved in flames. But at the end of that, there's a lot of structural members left of the house. Why is it that we see total destruction when we have wildfire?
So one of the reasons that it's so counterintuitive to us that a house could be totally destroyed from low intensities is because of what we typically see a house responded to by firefighters. And even if it's a total loss from a function standpoint, there's still material left because there was a fire response that kept things from burning to complete consumption. Well, that doesn't happen during wildland urban fires because so many houses that are exposed from the extreme wildfires, lofting, burning embers into the neighborhood, that now the fire protection can't cover the exposure of ignition. And once simultaneous fires begin to burn in tens to hundreds of houses simultaneously, you can't protect the entire subdivision, the entire community. So fires are burnt. If an ignition is sustained, then any small sustained ignition will free burn to total destruction. And we're not used to having houses, other structures completely burning, free burning to destruction.
Great, thanks, Jack. One of the big concerns here in Marin, and I don't think we're the only community that expresses it, is eucalyptus trees. It's probably the most common thing that I hear. Oh, my neighbor's got these eucalyptus trees, or there's some near me, and I'm sure they're going to catch on fire and burn down my house. And yet you had photos in there of eucalyptus trees right next to homes that have been completely obliterated and look like they were untouched. Can eucalyptus trees be maintained in a safe fashion?
Sure, but eucalyptus in particular is what I would call a trashy tree. And so what's happening with eucalyptus is that it's not highly liable to burn in the canopy of the trees, but over several years, and particularly in a place that hasn't been maintaining the litter that's deposited by the tree, it can be very heavy accumulations of bark strips and leaves from the trees that produce a deep and fairly lofted fuel bed that when it does ignite, it can catch part of the canopy on fire. But the photos that we saw was from Southern California, and the firebrand, the burning embers that were lofted came from Southern California chaparral. So the chamise and manzanita and the ceanothus that was burning in the field as a shrub fire during that cedar fire was the thing that was lofting burning embers during a 60, 70 mile an hour wind that lofted into the neighborhood, highly ignitable, and burned from within the eucalyptus forest or the eucalyptus groves. And the surface litter of the eucalyptus also burned.
Great, thanks, Jack. We'll take one more question. We covered this quite a bit in our last webinar, but it does come up a lot because there's an aggressive marketing campaign for exterior sprinklers. How effective are exterior sprinklers in preventing the kind of destruction that we're seeing here?
Well, yeah, that water works. The problem is getting it there effectively. And so if during particularly an offshore wind, a Diablo or a Santa Ana or whatever we happen to call it for the region. And the same thing was happening, by the way, in Oregon with the offshore east wind, enhancing the behavior of the fires in Oregon. So the problem is being able to get water effectively on the house. Well, the most effective way of dealing with water, exterior water, is to be moistening up with the forecast of hot, dry winds blowing, moistening up your area immediately around within 30 feet of your house, irrigating it a brief time in the morning and in the afternoon can do more than trying to effectively put water on dry material once the winds are blowing and once the conditions are severe. So any active measure to try to make the fire not, so that you don't have ignitions on your house, should be used as an addition rather than, you should not depend on active systems that require activation, even if it's remote.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Jack. And Jack will be back as part of our roundtable discussion. But I would like to move on now and introduce Steve Quarles. Steve can come on and tell us about some of the actual laboratory science that's gone behind this non-combustible zone.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks, Jack. I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about some of the laboratory experiments and post-fire assessment kind of issues or things that have been done to support the 5-foot zone. I first became aware of this zone in a publication by Smith and Adams back in 1991. They called it the zone A as opposed to the ember resistant zone or the non-combustible zone or zone 0, but the purpose was the same, and the purpose was to prevent ignition from firebrands and direct exposure from flames. And so it's this zone you see near the home that provides a surface that should embers land there, they're not going to have a detrimental effect on your house. So we're going to spend a few minutes just talking about this. Some of the experiments that have been done at the IBHS research facility in South Carolina were intended to evaluate whether or not the 5-foot zone was adequate. This assumes the importance of ember ignitions in home ignition scenarios. And the question is whether the 5-foot zone that has been provided in guidance and whatnot was adequate. Was it too big, too small? So we conducted a number of experiments to demonstrate that, or to better understand that. This is a report that's been published now by IBHS, and you can see the citation there at the bottom of the screen, lower left. The white rectangle is the test building itself. So it's in this darkened screen. You don't know exactly where the building is, but it's that white rectangle. And we used a couple of the different heat sources. The one that you're looking at in this particular figure is a gas burner, a natural gas burner. We also used a number of wooden cribs that were ignited, and these were positioned at various distances from the building, and we measured temperature on the siding as an indicator of vulnerability of that particular heat source. You'll notice that the picture on the left, the flames are sort of tilted backwards away from the building, and the picture on the right, the flames are tilted more towards the building. The way that wind blows around the building does influence what the flames are going to do with things that are close to the building. And so higher wind speeds, the flame does tend to point backwards. And so should that flame get to the home, it's going to get there via a backing fire burning as a surface fire towards the building in combustible fuels. So if rock mulch is there, for example, there's nothing to burn, and so that won't happen. At lower wind speeds, the flames do tend to bend towards the building, and so that would be a more vulnerable condition in this particular situation. Anyway, so we did these experiments, and a good summary chart is shown here, and you'll notice that the colored rectangles, whether they be dark green, light green, or red, are positions where the flaming items were. And I should say that these flaming items were not intended to represent a big tool shed or a neighboring home. It was intended to be vegetation that might be in proximity of the home, of your home, and so we were determining whether or not, given that kind of heat source, whether the distance would be adequate. So you'll notice that we did put these heat sources in various locations, from the center, the middle of the building towards a corner, and then right at the corner as a 45-degree angle to the wind. This is what the C is on the sort of left-hand side of the building. And the bottom line is that in most situations, 5 feet is a very conservative number. In almost all situations, 3 feet would be adequate given the heat sources that we were using. But you'll see, given the light green in the middle, that in the middle of the building, the flames tend to focus on the building itself. When they are towards the corner, the wind will tend to push the flames around the building. So closer doesn't mean worst case in these situations. But the very worst case was this cornering wind, the wind at 45 degrees to the angle, and something burning there. 3 feet was definitely a place not to have things burning. 5 feet was okay, 7 feet was better. All this led us to think that, or to the conclusion we drew, was that the 5 foot number is a good conservative number. In some situations, you could be a little bit less than that. The other thing is you want to be really careful about what you plant around the corner of your home, because that is the most vulnerable location. It's sometimes hard to know exactly which way the wind's going to blow around your home, and so to not put things in this corner area, it will be a conservative conservative approach. So I think the other thing that has become clear in the research that I was involved with when I was working at IBHS, and this became clear during a post-fire assessment after the Waldo Canyon fire in Colorado Springs in 2012, was the need to incorporate a vertical non-combustible zone, in essence, in conjunction with this horizontal zone that I just talked about. So on the right-hand picture, you can see that in many cases, the foundation will give you this non-combustible zone vertically. And the left-hand pictures from a firefighter saved, or first responder saved home in Waldo and Colorado Springs. Embers accumulated at this intersection of the stucco wall that had combustible components pretty closely behind this stucco. The bottom picture shows that ignition did occur from ember accumulation at the base of the wall, and even though it was on a concrete driveway in this case, the ember accumulation and the short distance, the small distance between the ground and the start of the siding was enough to result in igniting the combustible things behind the stucco. In this case, it was a foam insulation in addition to the wood framing. But for a passing fire truck, this home would have likely been completely lost, and instead it was damaged and provided a good lesson. So you need to have this zone, this vertical zone, in conjunction with or in addition to the horizontal zone. We did a little experiment at the IBHS lab just to sort of confirm this need for this vertical non-combustible zone. And the picture on the right shows 3 conditions. One is where you had 2 inches of a non-combustible zone vertically. The middle picture is the siding going all the way to the ground. And then the right-hand picture, the siding 6 inches from the ground, and you had a non-combustible thing in between. The embers from the generators at the lab ignited pretty easily the wall with no clearance, and embers did not ignite the other 2 conditions of 2 inches and 6 inches. So again, 6 inches is a good conservative number for this zone. Building code, when you have wood siding, building code already calls for this zone for other moisture-related degradation efforts. So to minimize the chance of decay, for example, in the siding from moisture, from backsplash of water hitting the siding, for example, or making it easier to see subterranean termites as they crawl from the ground to the siding. So the code says this already, it's just not always followed. And the other reason for using 6 inches as opposed to the 2 inches, which clearly worked for strictly an ember exposure, is that it just provides more protection for debris that might happen to blow up against the siding during a wildfire event, for example. Anyway, so pretty clear evidence that we need this vertical zone in conjunction with the horizontal zone that we've been talking about. So here's just another example from IBHS, and should siding ignite, and here we have siding that ignited via an ember ignition of mulch next to this next to this test building. So flame spread vertically upward on the wall and laterally across the wall, pointed to 3 additional vulnerabilities in this home, in addition to the combustible siding itself. And that would be the window, the gable end vent, and then the undereave area on the gable end side of the home, the building. If there were no bark mulch here, then likely the siding wouldn't have ignited, and these other parts of the home that in this case were vulnerable would not have been. So just important to acknowledge how ignition from bark mulch or wood mulch near the home can result in fire entering the home, your home, in any number of ways. The siding plus these other components that need to be, has provide sort of comparable protection as every other component. And you might say, well, what if I have non-combustible siding? Can I have, can I use mulch just the same? And I think the fact of the matter is that often in an assembly, a wall assembly, you will have combustible components, and sometimes they can be exposed, and even though you might have non-combustible siding. And this is an example of that. So when you look underneath the siding, if you could duck your head under there, it's kind of a narrow spot, but elsewhere on the home, you could see pretty clearly that the wood-based sheathing product overhung the foundation. And so should this bark mulch in this case be ignited by embers, and I've tested a number of bark mulches, and all of them are easily ignited by embers. So ember ignition of this bark mulch, flame spread to the building, and then ignition of this the combustible part of this wall assembly seems pretty likely, and that would be the pathway into the home itself. So even if you have this non-combustible cladding or siding, you still want to have these two things going for you. One is the horizontal ignition resistant zone, and the other is the vertical zone to accompany it. This is just more pictures from Colorado Springs from the Waldo Canyon. Another example of first responder house save. So this particular home on the left, you can see it has a pretty good zone, rock mulch, but they had piled firewood next to the home on top of this non-combustible zone, the rock mulch, and you really can't expect this zone to work well if you bypass the protection offered by it by putting combustible materials on top of it. So firefighters again kicked the firewood pile away and then extinguished the burning siding. There was damage in the garage. This was a wall of the garage. There was damage to the garage, but the home was saved. So I had an opportunity to visit Colorado Springs in 2015 and happened to drive by this very same home just to look, because I remembered this particular story. And sure enough, the wood pile was there again. So you need to learn the lesson the first time. The non-combustible zone is here, but the wood pile is there again. And it was unfortunate, I think. So I think that's it for me, and I'm going to pass it back to Rich.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Steve. We appreciate that. Not surprisingly, we have a number of questions about decks. I just want to let our attendees know that there are some really good videos on the Fire Safe Marin YouTube channel that Steve has narrated that deal with the A to Z's, everything you want to know about decks. But clearly decks are in the non-combustible zone. Do you have just a basic approach to safety when dealing with decks?
So this non-combustible zone that I talked about, the one near the home, that should incorporate under the footprint of any attached deck. So that's thing one. And you really want to do everything you can to reduce the chance that flames can impinge on the underside of the deck. And so if you remove combustibles from there, that will do that. Many people have wood decks. We have a redwood deck ourselves. I think the one thing, if you're renovating your deck, you can replace the deck board closest to the house with a non-combustible option. That's a pretty, not quite as big of a lift as replacing the entire deck. And that would minimize the chance of fire getting to the home. So that is in effect creating a small non-combustible zone next as your deck to wall. The final thing is just to periodically remove debris from the between deck board gaps, because it's the between deck board gaps that are going to be the most vulnerable component from an ember ignition perspective. And as Rich said, I have a fairly informative, if I say so myself, video on the Fire Safe Marin website.
Thanks, Dave. And please do check out that video. It's really very good. One more question, and I think you responded to this bit. There was sort of a question about whether stucco homes are less vulnerable to wildfire. And sort of related to that, it's very common that with stucco, there's a little space at the bottom, kind of a weeping area. And I think you even showed some vulnerability. You want to just sort of touch on that, please?
So the traditional 3-coat stucco is very resistant. It's a really good product from a fire perspective. You do have the weep screed at the bottom to allow water that might get in to get out. Because as that picture that I showed from Colorado Springs was a stucco clad wall, you want to maintain that non-combustible zone vertically, and you still can do that. I think that particular picture was complicated because it had the foam insulation just underneath the stucco siding. So particularly if you have that, you want to make sure you have that vertical zone, because the embers will accumulate. That weep screed is metal, so it's non-combustible, but it's conductive. And so if there's something combustible on the other side of it, on the inside side of it, that could be vulnerable from a heat transfer perspective if you have a lot of embers accumulating in that location, and you don't have a lot of distance to separate the accumulation area from that conductive area.
Great. Well, thanks, Steve. There's
Thank
a few fairly technical questions that we don't have time to get to right now. We'll try to respond to those. In fact, we will either later tonight or check out on our website for the answer to those. But thank you. Keep the questions coming. So with that, I'd like to introduce Battalion Chief Todd Lando, who's going to give us some practical tips of how to protect our homes in that 5-foot zone.
Thanks, Rich. And thanks, Jack and Steve. I just want to say real quickly, as a firefighter for 30 years and somebody who's involved in wildfire mitigation now, and as a homeowner, frankly, in the wildland urban interface, the debt of gratitude we owe to Jack and Steve and their colleagues for the research that they've done over the last 30 years is just, it's incalculable. Really, everything that we talk about at Fire Safe Marin has its roots in the history of wildfires, the research that they've conducted and are continuing to contribute to, and it's really an honor for Fire Safe Marin to have them here and participating in our organization. So, thank you. I'm gonna make a quick transition here to talk about what we're calling Zone Zero. You've heard some references, Jack talked about the home ignition zone, which is a concept and terminology that has been, part of our lexicon for years now. Steve even talked about the transition to this concept and the number of Zone Zero, why we use that terminology. But I want to make sure that our colleagues here in Marin get credit. The concept, the term Zone Zero actually came from a meeting 2 years ago where we tried to shoehorn in a new zone, this new concept, the science that Jack and Steve had produced to show the importance of the first 5 feet. And we sat in discussion and thought, boy, we have a lot of materials that talk about Zone 1 and Zone 2. How do we fit one in before Zone 1? And it was Zone Zero. We realized that this was really ground zero, the first 5 feet, ground zero for where homes ignite. And it's now you're seeing this terminology pop up nationally, and we're proud of that in Marin. So just a quick illustration, I'm going to repeat for a couple minutes some of the things that Jack and Steve have talked about, but I want to illustrate it and bring it to the practical level for homeowners, give you some tips, some ideas of what you can look for and how you can make changes around your home. The first 5 feet is really illustrated right here. We're talking about the surface, the ground, the area right around the outside walls of your house. And Rich pointed out that we've got a lot of information on home hardening. We've got information on defensible space, landscaping, plant selection. All of these things tie together. They're all important. None of them stand alone. But I really think that we've learned that this Zone Zero, this first 5 feet, is the most critical place for you to pay attention to. And what I like is that it's also the easiest place for homeowners to take action. So recap here, most homes are going to ignite from embers. I'm going to show you a couple images that will help you understand what we're talking about when we refer to embers. This is video from a police officer's dashboard cam during the campfire in 2018. You can see the intensity, the number of embers. These are embers blowing across a road. Presumably there are homes in that vicinity. This is a fantastic illustration of what those embers can do, in this case, in the forest or grasslands around a community. Again, this is the campfire. These are embers falling from the sky. And look back down when he swings the camera back down. Look what's happened in the few seconds since they turned the camera to the sky. These are spot fires that have ignited in fine grasses, fine vegetation fuels. And frankly, the same thing was happening in the front yards and around the surfaces around homes in that same vicinity. Here's another image very similar to the ones that Jack showed you, but we can't overstate the importance of recognizing that those embers, when they land on surfaces around a home, when they land on the combustible materials around the outside of the home, in your bark mulch, for example, those materials where it will ignite, leaving green trees in the vicinity of this home. This is research that I think Steve was intimately involved in, but it's one of the best illustrations. This is a home that IBHS built in a laboratory setting. The right-hand side of the home is built with ignition-resistant materials. The left-hand side, not so much. The left-hand side used a bark mulch within 5 feet of the structure. The right-hand side used a decorative gravel mulch, and you can see the dramatic difference in the resistance to the embers that are being blown at this building. This is just, the best illustration you're going to see of what we're talking about. This translates directly into the real world. This is a photograph. I apologize that it's blurry. It's the best copy I've been able to find of this picture, but this is a firefighter trying to protect a home during the Woolsey fire in 2018, burning on the same day that the campfire was burning in Northern California. This was in Southern California. And you can see exactly where the embers are accumulating, and you can see that it's the bark mulch around the exterior of this stucco home that has ignited, giving this firefighter a real run for his money. You saw this picture, same picture with in Steve's presentation, but this is where we tie the home itself, the home hardening work that we want you all to do with zone 0 in this area around the exterior of the house. That's 6 inches closest to the ground, the separation between the ground, and in this case, you can even see leaf litter on the ground, and the combustible wood shingle siding. That's the critical 6 inches. Our goal is to keep the fire from spreading from the ground to the structure itself, and creating that separation. In this case, it's 6 inches of exposed foundation that separates the place where the embers will accumulate and the siding itself. Very important. This is an example image from a home in Marin County. This is a home, I apologize that I'm not backed up farther in the image, but what you see here is non-combustible siding. This is hardy shingles with a ember and fire resistant vent, a Vulcan brand vent, and a concrete pathway around the exterior of the house. You're going to see more images from this in a second. So those things tie together that the structure or separate the structure from zone 0. And as we've already covered, mulch, your choice in mulch within 5 feet of the structure is absolutely critical. This is an image of a gorilla hair, shredded redwood or shredded cedar type mulch, very commonly used. It's has its purpose in certain situations, but this material does not belong adjacent to your house. What we want to see for homeowners, and this is a simple change that you can make around your structure, we want to see you choose rock or gravel mulch. We want to see non-combustible, non-organic materials used as mulch immediately adjacent to the home. Wood chips or bark are out. They have their place in your yard more than 5 feet from your structure. Shredded redwood needs to be applied very carefully. It's the easiest to ignite. I always point out that that's what the Cub Scouts use to start their campfires. So you want to be very judicious with its use around your home if you live in the wildland-urban interface. Here's an image. This is from the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa in 2017. This is a home, bark mulch. You can see one of the homes is actually burning in the background. The other is destroyed. And you can see how easily the bark mulch around the outside of the house has ignited. This is where the money meets the road. Look at this home. This is a photograph that Steve provided us, but take a look at what they've done here. You've got combustible siding. You've got wood shingles. That's a topic for another discussion. But immediately adjacent to the home, we've got a 3 to 5 foot space of non-combustible material. I'm a little concerned about some of the grasses here, but what we see are sparse grasses that have irrigation. As long as we keep those green and we keep them separated and sparse, I think it's something we can accept. What we have, though, immediately adjacent to the house is a space where it's got non-combustible gravel mulch. We've got 6 inches of separation between that siding and the ground, and we have conditions that ought to protect the home. If we look real close at this image, we can also see that they've got a fine wire mesh screen over their vents. There are a lot of good things going for this home and a lot of reasons that we would expect that this home has a chance of surviving even the worst wildfires. This is an example of a home that was recently retrofitted by one of probably somebody who's viewing tonight in Corte Madera. Just a wonderful example of taking these actions to heart, looking closely at their own home and making the changes that'll make a difference. They removed a large amount of bark mulch from the exterior of the house, replaced it with a real dark gray or black decorative gravel. Looks fantastic. It achieves the same purpose that mulch always has, helps hold moisture in the ground. It allows a permeable surface where water can infiltrate through during the winter and evaporate through during the summer, and it protects the home from ember ignition. You're not going to have the heat generated that you would if bark mulch were present and ignited from those embers. This one, this picture, it might be a little blurry on your screen, but it's another nice example of a home that's replaced the bark mulch around the outside of their home with decorative gravel. As we talk about zone 0, one of the things that exists within 5 feet of a home is often a fence or a gate. So fences typically terminate into the walls of the home with a gate. What we see here is an image of a really common image, a fence burning during a wildfire. You can see that the vegetation's not burning. This fence is ignited from embers. As the fire travels along this fence, it's going to reach the house and it's going to ignite the house unless we've separated the fence from the house, either by opening that gate. That's something we recommend while a fire is burning nearby if you haven't had time to retrofit your home with a non-combustible metal gate. We really can't emphasize enough what a great investment a metal gate can be to attach your fence to your house. Here's an example. Steel gates. These are items that are on the shelf at Home Depot. We've seen examples for, the off-the-shelf materials that look fantastic all the way on up to big, fancy, expensive custom gates. And we've seen some homeowners get creative and build their own. Well, the goal here is to separate the fence, which is likely to ignite during a wildfire, from the house itself, keep it from spreading to the house. This is not a wonderful example of the use of mulch around the house. I'd like to retake this picture someday with gravel mulch in place of this bark here, but you can see that there is a separation. In fact, in this case, probably close to 2 feet of separation of the foundation height between the siding and the ground. There's another example of a metal gate, real simple factor. We saw communities like Coffee Park during the Tubbs fire, and frankly, during the campfire in Paradise, neighborhoods with closely adjoined homes with outstanding defensible space. They were impacted by embers that ignited their fences. The fires traveled to the houses, spread via the gate. And unfortunately, we lost, in some cases, hundreds or thousands of homes because of simple vulnerabilities that could have been fixed. Something for everyone to consider. This is a deck, a pretty common scene. I think in my community, I could probably look, frankly, under my own deck, and certainly under neighbors, and walk through my neighborhood and see that we're limited on our storage space outdoors. None of us are living on big lots. And we use this space. It's a relatively dry, protected space for storage. Firewood, lumber, or a giant kindling pile underneath your deck is not a good idea if you live in the wildland urban interface. So keeping that space clean, recognizing the vulnerability and making a choice to clean that space out, remove the combustible materials, and then provide some screening. This is a fantastic example of a home that's really taken this to heart. They've used a 1/16 inch wire mesh hardware type cloth to screen off the entire underside of their deck. On top of that, they've added gravel mulch. Looks like within about 5 feet of the attachment, this deck that's attached to the structure, and also underneath the deck. And this achieves two things, several things really. It keeps the embers from blowing into that critical vulnerable space. It discourages the homeowner from placing and using that space under the deck for storage. And it, it provides some protection from rodents and vermin and other concerns, but it's really providing a high level of protection from one of the biggest vulnerabilities this house might have had during a wildfire. I want people to think about the leaf litter that tends to build up in that zone 0. We see, especially in the fall, which is when we see the weather patterns, the Diablo winds here in Northern California, the Santa Anas in Southern California, Chinooks in Montana. Those types of winds happen in the fall when leaves are falling, and those leaves tend to build up against surfaces where they can blow up against a wall. We want to see this space kept spotlessly clean. And I want to caution people against just simply blowing the leaves or raking the leaves 5 feet from the building. What we see when the wind picks up, those leaves are going to blow right back into this space. So it's really important to pick them up, move them to a covered compost pile, or bag them, put them in your green waste can, whatever your method is for dealing with fallen leaves. Get them away from the house and get them to a place where they can't reaccumulate against the wall right at the wrong moment. This is, I think, my favorite thing to point out to homeowners, and it's just the simple, common combustible items that you probably have stored or that you're using for decoration or for other functions in that space within 5 feet of your house. Things that you don't think about, things that they're part of your lifestyle, and you don't realize that they could be making you vulnerable. There are a lot of different approaches to dealing with this, but take a look at that area outside of your home. Do you have patio furniture cushions? It's the cushions that are typically the most vulnerable, unless you have something like wicker or fine wood furniture. It might be outdoor toys that your kids play with, natural fiber doormats like the jute fiber doormat shown here, recycling cans, firewood. I'll show you some other examples. So we've got a pile of firewood here with the jute fiber doormat on top of it. I show this picture all the time, but this is within 5 feet of a house that's otherwise very well protected. It's a house that's got about a 6-foot concrete pathway around the entire exterior of the house. They've actually got some separation between the ground and the wood siding with the foundation. Everything's great, but they chose to put this firewood here. This is a simple fix. Move this firewood indoors during the summertime, burn your firewood during the winter, or many people aren't burning the firewood anymore. We're finding piles of firewood that simply have been there because the homeowners can't figure out what to do with them. They don't even use their fireplace anymore. This is a tremendous vulnerability. This is an example of a location where a jute doormat once existed. This is during the Woolsey fire in Southern California. You can see the scorch marks where the jute fiber mat was sitting in front of this door. These people got lucky. They did have a small ignition of some of the material on the left-hand side of the screen there, but the house was saved. A vulnerability that you can fix by picking that doormat up and putting it indoors during the summer months. You choose a heavy metal grate screen or a heavy rubber doormat rather than a fiber doormat during the summer months. We talked a little bit about patio furniture cushions. These are patio furnitures that show some scorch marks on them during the Nuns fire in 2017 in Napa County. Significant vulnerability. These happen to be on a stone patio, which helped protect the home, but some of the furniture did ignite during the fire. This is one that we see all the time right in zone 0. You store your recycling cans underneath the eaves of your home. We got some photographs. In fact, my next picture will show you one of these cans that's ignited and burned. But it's really, in this picture, it's the recycling materials that didn't fit in the can that are the problem. We've got exposed cardboard out where it's going to be exposed to embers during that ember shower during the wildfire. Those materials are going to ignite. They're going to ignite the plastic cans. And if these cans are where most people are storing them underneath the eaves of their homes, it's a really significant issue. You can see some examples of things that can get you in trouble here. Here's a can that ignited during the Tubbs fire from embers that landed on or inside the can. If the lid of that can is propped up, they'll go right inside where it's full of dry grass clippings. On the right, we've got an example of this is a nice privacy screen to hide the ugly cans, but it's a wooden screen surrounded by bark mulch with these two cans right underneath the eaves of the house, a real issue that ought to be dealt with. And the homeowner, in this case, has put some love and effort into building this, but they should rethink it. The very least, in this case, I would recommend that they keep those cans closed at all times and replace that bark mulch in the short term with a gravel mulch. This one's just for fun. I think this qualifies as zone 0, but here's somebody's fire alarm with the bird's nest. We don't want to move that nest while the birds are nesting. But by the time we get into fire season, into the late term of fire season, it should be safe to move that nest. The baby birds should have moved on their way, and it would be a good time to move it. This particular house was hit by a fire about 2 weeks after this photograph was taken, and they had removed the nest by that point. And I'll wrap up with just an image. Here are some juniper shrubs planted in somebody's window box as we transition in the coming weeks to talking about vegetation, landscaping choices. We're going to emphasize that certain plants really don't belong in the defensible space or in zone 0 around a home, and juniper is certainly one of them. So thank you for going through that. I hope you've got some practical ideas and some applications and some images that will help you understand where your vulnerabilities are and what you can do walking around the exterior of your house and looking for the issues that you might not have even realized were there.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Todd. I really appreciate that. Our team's been doing a pretty good job of keeping up with the questions that are coming in, and we're running a little bit late. So I'd like to invite Jack and Steve back, and we can have a little bit of a roundtable discussion here and see if we can pick up another question or two. All right. Normally at this point, we also have a slide, which is our takeaways, but I thought maybe we'd approach it a little bit different tonight. And I would ask each of you, if you were to leave our attendees with a takeaway, what would that be? Starting with Jack.
I would say in relation to fire agencies and our general societal expectation, fire agencies take care of fire and take care of us regarding fire. We need to recognize that we don't engage as homeowners in reducing the ignitability of our homes, then first responders can't be effective and can't be in parity with the task of protecting our communities.
Great, thanks. Steve?
So I would just remind everybody that home survival is a function of things you do on your property and things you do, including your house, but also vegetation and combustibles on your property. And so when you're thinking about that, walk out your doors, put your back against the wall, look down and then look straight out. But remember, when you're looking down, you don't want to be looking at too many combustibles, because embers are going to fly over any defensible space that you might have any control over. So your defensible space, the vegetation and other things, combustibles on your property, they're to keep the fire from burning to your home. Embers can fly over anything that you have control over. So your home and the space right near your home has to be able to resist those embers that will come.
Great, thanks, Steve. Todd?
I think it's important to consider all these things, and that defensible space, hardened structure, and keeping a clean zone 0 they all work together, and you have to do all three. You can't look at any of these in isolation. When you've taken control of your defensible space, zone 0, you've taken steps to harden your structure, you really can safely live and these environments in the Western US. You can build a home that can withstand a wildfire. And critically, since tonight's topic is zone 0, I want to emphasize to everybody how easy taking care of zone 0 can be. This is probably the lowest cost, lowest hanging fruit, and then the biggest bang for your buck that you can get when it comes to preparing your home. We're talking about relocating your doormat or choosing a different doormat, relocating your patio furniture cushions, and moving your garbage cans. These are not high cost items. These are things that you can do tonight before you go to bed. And they'll make a tremendous impact and a big difference when a fire hits your neighborhood.
Great, thanks. So if you kind of wrap all this together, I think for some of us, maybe we get a new appreciation how wildfires actually do burn the homes. And in fact, it is the vulnerability of the homes themselves that oftentimes is the precipitate cost for the homes burning down. So we can do work around that. It's all proven by science. The 5-foot zone didn't come up by accident. It's really been researched. And as Todd points out, doing work in that area is probably the cheapest and most effective thing you can do as a first pass to help make your home and your family a bit safer. But kind of related to all that is the issue of codes and codes enforcement. Can we just create a bunch of codes and start enforcing them to make all this problem go away?
Well, so we don't have codes, and we have codes to eliminate transients like pine needles in your rain gutters and firewood, like particularly like in his photos. You can't code away either through enforcement or getting it done on these kinds of seasonal sorts of maintenance and cleanup. So codes can only go so far. They only go so far for compartment fire. And when you look at all the small things that are local to a house and how burning embers can ignite small fires that end up burning your house down, you can't code those kinds of things away. Those are the things where we homeowners need to be engaged.
I would say that codes can help, but codes really only truly influence new construction. And I don't know about you, but I already live somewhere, and I think the issue is existing homes and how do we effectively and affordably retrofit or mitigate places where we already live. And I think that's the ongoing challenge.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think that, the building codes in California, Chapter 7A of our building code, is just a fantastic tool that helps us build and in this case, rebuild whole communities in a way that is much more resistant to igniting from wildfires. You're going to see a change. It's already been adopted into law. Parts of it went into effect last month, and when more will go into effect over the next 2 years, actually addressing zone 0, that the ember resistant zone around homes within 5 feet. That's a state law. It'll apply to unincorporated state lands in California, but you're going to probably see it trickle down to local communities as well. But the reality is, we even in a place like Marin, where we have the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, and we've built a bigger evaluation and inspection and in some cases enforcement system than most counties have. Really what those codes are doing are providing us some guidance, guidelines, and education tools for homeowners. There's no system where we're going to be able to go out and police every leaf that falls against a house during the autumn in Marin or anywhere else for that matter. But it's really up to homeowners understanding that that's their vulnerability and knowing that there are simple things they can do to protect their home.
Thanks, Todd. Todd, I know one of the things that you talked a lot about is the importance of maintenance. So you can have a plant or a bush or whatever that seems relatively safe, but if it's not properly maintained, suddenly the leaves that are under the dry twigs and whatnot create a problem. And I know we can actually be fooled sometimes by the vegetation we have in our yards. We can sometimes have vegetation that seems to be very moist. So for example, something like ice plant. And I know Jack had an experience with ice plant one time that I think illustrates that you really got to look at the entirety of the vegetation. You want to fill us in on that, Jack?
Yeah, so the way that ice plant grows is it puts on these succulent stems that are full of moisture, but what it leaves behind are dead branch material and the dead stems and that are underneath. And if you've got that, and typically have that up at your house, and it's a wood wall, or as Steve was showing, even with stucco, if you've got an exposed plate and subsheathing underneath, then you can get smoldering combustion from the ice plant, from the dead material under the ice plant, to make those flammable under the stucco or under the non-ignitable actual siding that essentially unattended. It's very difficult to see if you're patrolling a neighborhood and you go by, you patrol it, you don't see anything, you come back in the afternoon and the house is down. And the way that happens is that you get smoldering combustion in this dead material under the succulent ice plant, or under the green leaves of the English ivy, or all the dead material and just under that juniper that you love so much, that's right next to that wood wall or that window, or the flammable subsheathing at the base plate of the wall.
Great, thanks, Jack. Did somebody want to add to that?
Just a point, can't emphasize enough that all plants require maintenance, and while succulents, and if well maintained, can be some of the better plants, especially in close to homes, they require maintenance. And ice plant, including the native ice plants here in California, require a lot of maintenance to keep them fire resistant. So don't think that you can plant something and just forget it and walk away. All of these plants require irrigation, proper hydration, not over irrigated or under irrigated. They require something to keep the moisture in the soil, and frequent pruning. Doesn't matter what plant it is, to remove dead material, clean up underneath it. Maintenance is critical.
Yeah. Well, one of the next month, Todd will be back, probably with some assistance to talk. We've talked about the first 5 feet around the house now, but there are other zones. So we're going to be going out 30 feet and beyond that. And there are other strategies to improve the safety of your home in those areas. And we'll be covering that topic next month. I do really want to thank Todd and Jack and Steve. Great presentation tonight. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to your questions. We do try to wrap up on time, but check out our website to be able to see our response to those questions. And then, of course, this webinar will be recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube channel. And we have a new feature now where we take the webinars and then we further break them down into individual sections. If you wanted to just focus on something Todd said or what Jack covered or Steve or whatever, that's available. We've done that with all of our previous webinars, so it's easier to find the information that you're looking for. So I encourage you all to take a look at that. Take a look at the Fire Safe Marin website. There's just a load of information out there. And if you have any questions, you can contact us at Fire Safe Marin. We're really pretty good at responding either by email or phone call, and we'll get back to you to try to help you with your problems. So thank you all. We had great attendance tonight. Thank you for taking the time to do that. And one last thank you to our presenters tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you.